Everyone knows Roman Pompeii, but how many of us are aware that this ancient city already had a long history behind it at the time of its tragic demise? What do we know about its founders, its conquerors, its inhabitants? Who designed its first street plans and built its first buildings?
The whole of the city's urban fabric had already been structured from the Archaic period.
What was the original Pompeii like? Why was it established in the heart of Campania, one of the most dangerous regions in Italy?
It's an area that attracts a great many people because of its geographical location, the fertility of its soil, and the beauty of the landscape.
Discover the Pompeii before Pompeii, an unknown history, 8 centuries long. 800 years of alliances, betrayals, and architectural design.
We can see evidence of town planning, with the division and organisation of urban blocks.
The Samnites refortified the city. They organised the entire urban layout of Pompeii as we know it today.
800 years of prosperity, decadence, and merciless wars.
The Roman conquest of Pompeii took place in a violent, dramatic, and traumatic fashion.
A unique adventure, a journey to the source, in the company of leading specialists, historians, and archaeologists. Beneath the Roman Pompeii, miraculously preserved by the ashes of Vesuvius, lie the traces of an even older city, an architectural feat, the result of the meeting of different peoples from different cultures. A monumental city, rich and prosperous, the object of every desire. Travel back through 800 years in the history of one of the most famous ancient cities in the world. Return to the origins of Pompeii. The long history of Pompeii is inseparable from that of Vesuvius. Returning to the origins of this ancient city is impossible without returning to the turbulent past of this still active volcano. A volcano upon whose slopes the world's first volcanic observatory was built in the middle of the 19th century.
We're on the western flank of Vesuvius. The volcano's history has been marked by sporadic activity.
400,000 years ago, volcanoes emerged in the Italian region of Campania. Tons of molten magma forced their way through the most fragile layers of the Earth's crust and gushed out onto its surface. Vesuvius is part of an ensemble of 3 different volcanic zones, forming the Campanian Arc, which also includes the Phlegrean, or burning fields, the island of Ischia, and several undersea volcanoes. 3 areas containing volcanoes that are currently dormant, and no one knows when they might become active again. In prehistoric times and throughout antiquity, the inhabitants of the region were pretty much unaware of the danger posed by this mountain, which had not erupted for a very long time.
Campania was inhabited during the Bronze Age. The volcano was inactive for 4,000 years.
And so, 4,000 years ago, eruptions could have wiped any prehistoric civilizations that had settled in the region off the map, long before the creation of Pompeii. Because the eruption that took place in 79 AD was devastating. Its power was equivalent to 1,000 Hiroshima bombs. Within 24 hours, it had engulfed the city of Pompeii and killed more than 3,000 of its inhabitants.
Some sources say that the Pompeians knew that this mountain was a volcano, but no one knew that it was active, that it could erupt, with such disastrous results.
For tens of thousands of years, volcanic eruptions shaped this landscape, bathed by the Sarno. This meandering river flows through an incredibly rich plain. Campania is a vast garden, surmounted by a volcano which was once much higher than it is today. In 2000 BC, during the Bronze Age, Vesuvius was still 1,800 meters high, instead of 1,200 meters its current height. Successive eruptions changed its shape, fertilizing the surrounding plains. People had been settling in this area from prehistoric times, as archaeological discoveries made a few kilometers east of the crater and the current site of Pompeii have shown. Spread over an area of 1,000 square meters, the excavation of Nola began with a routine survey. But as luck would have it, 6 meters down, the experts came across a kiln. A strange discovery, because this kind of domestic item wouldn't normally exist in the middle of the countryside. They assumed that there must be a dwelling or a village beneath their feet. Other surveys were carried out, and a few days later, some huts and an enclosure containing the skeletons of 13 sheep were unearthed. A journey into the past began, because these dwellings didn't date from antiquity. They were almost 4,000 years old. The archaeologist's trowels and brushes revealed the hollow impressions of these prehistoric houses. These discoveries tell us about the people who founded this village in 1700 BC, the Sarastes. The dwellings were built on a network of islets and navigable artificial waterways, whose banks were reinforced by poles sunk into the mud of the marshes. The banks were marked out and strengthened by palisades made of tree trunks. The Sarastes were obviously masters of irrigation techniques and land drainage. They moved around in long, narrow boats carved out of tree trunks. A dock was identified, with at least 2 canoes still moored to the posts.
There were canoes that carried wood and clay, and these islets were regularly flooded and regularly rebuilt. I think they had a very clear idea of construction, and even hydraulic construction. The banks were regularly reinforced.
The first 3 huts unearthed in Nola provide valuable information about their inhabitants' way of life. Facing northwest or southeast, depending on the wind, they were horseshoe-shaped and 2 stories tall. 5 meters in height, the largest is 17 meters in length and 9 meters wide, and could accommodate 12 people. Inside, numerous objects including bone knives, spears, and various containers were found. The clay vases, in an excellent state of preservation, were shaped and decorated in a variety of ways that had never been seen before. In the smallest hut, a little apart from the others, and apparently reserved for a single person, was a kind of headdress, decorated with polished boar's tusks. Did it belong to a village chief or a sorcerer? No one knows. The reason for the incredible state of preservation of these dwellings is obvious. 2,000 years before the destruction of Pompeii, the huts in Nola, like the buildings of the Roman city, were engulfed under tons of volcanic pumice stone from Vesuvius. According to the experts, an eruption would have initially caused Nola to be buried under a deluge of ashes that would have lasted for more than 14 hours. Heavy rain, mixed with innumerable volcanic particles, would have caused mudslides, petrifying the whole village forever. Within this context, the huts would have been frozen before the timber from which they were made rotted away. As would be the case in Pompeii, Nola's inhabitants probably didn't have time to prepare their escape. The eruption was very big, with burning clouds falling up to 15 kilometers northwest of the crater. In 1700, the scene was one of apocalyptic devastation. And yet, the people stayed on. They established new villages along the meandering Sarno River and near the shore, because the Tyrrhenian Sea was then 4 kilometers inland. The site was ideal. The soil was fertile and the coast was nearby. The region was a source of life and an ideal place for trade.
I think that part of the population had been elsewhere. I assume that's why they joined up with the groups that founded Pompeii.
But did the Sarastes have the skills to build a city? One thing is certain. Despite the dangers posed by the volcano over the Sarno Valley, the survivors of the eruption probably moved towards the coast, where they were likely to have encountered another, more technologically advanced group. Settlers from over the seas, the Greeks. Could they have founded the city of Pompeii together? From the 8th century BC, the Greek city-states began a large-scale colonization drive in the Western Mediterranean, leading to the creation of centers of Greek culture in Sicily and southern Italy, starting with Campania. Around 770 BC, settlers from the Greek city of Eretria founded a colony on an islet off the coast of Campania. They called it Pithecusae, the present-day Ischia. On Ischia, the Greek settlers created a small city and forged relationships with other Greeks who had settled on the coasts of the Italian peninsula. 30 years later, new settlers having arrived, the island of Ischia became too small. A new colony was founded on a hill on the mainland, on the eastern coast of Campania, in the heart of the Phrygian fields.
They looked towards the coast and settled in a place, Cumae, where there was a rocky hill upon which they could establish a city. Around the city of Cumae there was a plain, which was good for agriculture and which was also rich because it was volcanic soil. We're in a geomorphological ensemble that's very good for agriculture, which is also rich in water, so it's a favourable environment for people to settle in.
These colonies started as simple trade counters. They controlled the shipping routes through which cereals and metals were transported. The Greeks now dominated the Strait of Messina. They settled permanently throughout the region of the Phrygian fields and without a doubt encountered the Sarastes. Did they also settle on the site of the future Pompeii, which was then very close to the sea? It's possible, because at the end of the 6th century, the Greeks laid the first stone of a place with a promising future: Naples, Neapolis, a Greek word meaning the new city. Modern-day Naples has long covered the ancient city's remains, but under its inhabitants' feet, 20 meters down, are the remains of the Greek necropolis, miraculously preserved for more than 2,500 years.
We're in a vestibule dedicated to the magistrates. The high-relief sculpture at the bottom, cut directly into a block of tuff, shows 3 figures: a woman in a peplos and a long mantle, a man with a short toga and sandals, and on the right, in profile, the remains of a carved panther which refers directly to Dionysus.
With the foundation of Naples, although the Greeks dominated the coast, it was another civilization that held sway inland: the Etruscans. During the 7th century BC, the Etruscans, from the center of the Italian peninsula, settled north of Vesuvius, where they founded the cities of Volturnum, the future Capua, and Nola. They mixed there with the descendants of the Greek settlers, who had been there for nearly a century. The Etruscans and Greeks living in Cumae introduced their luxury goods and lifestyles to the local populations. The alliance between the two different civilizations was all the stronger, as the Greek colonies of Ischia and Cumae benefited from working the minerals imported from Etruria. In the 7th century, it was this economic alliance between the Greeks and the Etruscans that would enable the foundation of a city that would get people talking: Pompeii. The site had been occupied from the Bronze and Iron Ages. But it's hard to say if, at the time, it was a real settlement or just temporary dwellings. The choice of this location, however, seems obvious, because it's located near the mouth of the Sano River, on the top of a plateau at an altitude of 33 meters. The promontory is an ideal point from which to monitor the movement of ships in the Bay of Naples. Another logical reason for putting it here was that the first builders had all the construction materials that they required on site.
Pompeii is one of the finest examples of the use of rock from Neapolitan volcanoes. This rock has been quarried since the time of the Greeks, precisely because it is light, resistant to compression, and easy to handle. It can be cut very easily.
Although the exact date of the placing of the city's first stone remains a mystery, the reasons are clear, especially since the surrounding soil turned out to be particularly rich.
It's an area that attracts a great many people because of its geographical location, the fertility of its soil, and the beauty of the landscape.
Drawn by these benefits, it's likely that the population was constantly growing in the region around Pompeii. The city probably resulted from the merging of 5 Oscan-speaking villages, because Pompeii means 5 in this language. The Greeks probably occupied it before the city fell under other influences.
Pompeii, like Rome, stands at the confluence of 3 cultures: an indigenous Italic culture and 2 invasive cultures. The Etruscan culture, which comes from the north, and the Greek culture, which comes both from southern Italy, Greater Greece, colonized early on by the Greeks, and from the sea.
It's the Etruscan and Greek cultures we see most in Pompeii.
Beneath Roman Pompeii, well known to the millions of visitors who come here every year, there lies another hidden city, an archaic, much older Pompeii. But what was this city like? And how far did it extend?
The most recent research shows that the whole of the urban fabric was already laid out from the Archaic period. Perhaps it wasn't occupied, but it was laid out, following a regular plan, around 2 main axes: the Via del Foro and the Via de Mercurio, going north-south, and the Via Stabiana and Via del Vesuvio, linking 2 gates, the Vesuvius Gate and the Stabia Gate.
To get their bearings in the site, the first archaeologists divided their map into areas numbered 1 to 9. This is how they found traces of the first builders, who, influenced by Etruscan architectural traditions, first laid out 2 orthogonal streets. The east-west axis begins at the Marina Gate and continues towards Via Abbondanza. Perpendicular to this, the north-south axis begins in Via delle Scuole to the south, continues along the eastern side of the Forum, then follows Via del Foro and Via de Mercurio.
The city was founded in the 6th century, and we know that it was already laid out around 2 large shrines, the Temple of Apollo on the one side and the Temple of Athena on the other.
At the time, The city grew until it covered almost 66 hectares, 44 of which were residential, the rest being made up of gardens and fields.
Current research suggests that there was no gradual expansion of the centre around the Forum to the north and east, but that the city had already been built and laid out in the way we see it today.
The early days of Pompeii were marked by a population of diverse origins: Saracens, Greeks and Etruscans. This cultural melting pot influenced the architecture of the first temples.
The Temple of Apollo and the Doric Temple have very different architectural styles. With the Temple of Apollo, it's the outer wall that was built first, probably at the end of the 7th century. There's a sacred enclosure with an open-air altar. It's a characteristic of the Etruscan Italic temples that they're built within an outer wall. It's a temple that's made to be seen from the front when you enter the enclosure. It's decorated like the Etruscan temples with terracotta. The Doric temple is positioned overlooking the Sarno River and overlooking the sea a little further off. It's made to be seen from all sides, like a Greek temple.
Pompeii is a port, so Pompeii was obviously also frequented by sailors, and artisans were brought to Pompeii to embellish the city's public monuments. We can see that in the 6th century, when the city was Etruscan, it had temples which were decorated with terracotta by the same craftsmen who worked in Cumae. It was the inhabitants of Pompeii who brought in the best craftsmen in the field to decorate their temples in the style of Greek, or more generally Campanian temple roofs.
Pompeii controlled Campania's particularly fertile hinterland. The city was located on the crossroads of several trade routes, and the saltworks, which were nearby, under the protection of Hercules, provided salt, an essential element for processing dairy products and preserving meat, which could then be exported. The various peoples living in the region got along together as best they could.
When the Greeks arrived on these shores, they sought to trade inland, because it was inland that they'd find the livestock breeders who would provide the meat. And it was to preserve this meat that they would need salt.
There's coexistence between these peoples until some of them want to get the upper hand to control territories, which is obviously when wars break out.
Being highly strategic, the original Pompeii was inevitably greatly coveted, and the city's first builders soon felt the need to protect themselves.
From very early in the 6th century, Pompeii would look, generally speaking, like the current Pompeii. That's to say, there was already a wall.
The wall is certainly an important structural element of the city. And we know that the wall was already built in the 6th century, along the same line as it is today.
What's most striking is the Greek town planning, evident the temples and also the walls, which shows the skill of the Greeks.
The first dwellings were gathered inside a perimeter wall 3 kilometers in length. This first fortification was built with blocks of papamonte, that's to say volcanic tuff rock. But a mystery remains. This wall is a strange shape. It bends illogically at the northeast corner. Researchers have come up with a theory to explain it. The Sarno, which flows today to the south of the ruins, could have flowed to the north during the city's creation. The outer wall sits on this old course. The oldest buildings in Pompeii were therefore built by social groups who until then populated the Sarno Valley and who moved near the coast. But the good relationship between people of different origins and cultures was only a facade. Very early on, the Etruscans from the north tried to oust the Greeks who had settled in Cumae.
What we have to understand is that Campania is the front line between the Greek civilization coming from the south and the Etruscan civilization coming from the north.
In 524 BC, only a few years after the foundation of archaic Pompeii, the Etruscans, who had borrowed the hoplite's weapons and phalanx combat tactics from the Greeks, confronted them outside the ramparts of Cumae during a land battle, won by the Greeks, led by Aristodemus. But the rivalry between Etruscans and Greeks didn't stop there, and would have serious consequences for the fate of the nascent Pompeii.
By Greeks, we mean Greeks from different places. There were Greeks from Sicily, from Syracuse, from Corinth. There were Greeks from Athens. In this case, it's the Greeks from Sicily, who were behind Hieron of Syracuse, who came to support the Greeks of Cumae against the Etruscans during the famous naval battle in 474.
2,500 years ago, the Tyrrhenian Sea wasn't just a peaceful space for trade and communication. It was also the scene of terrible clashes. In 474 BC, the Etruscans, wanting to take their revenge on the Greeks of Cumae, attacked them. A bad move. The Greeks were supported by the fleet of Hieron I of Syracuse. Trapped in the Bay of Naples, the Etruscan fleet was literally annihilated. The defeat was bitter and laden with consequences for the Etruscans. It was the end of their city's dominance in southern maritime trade. A deadly consequence for the Etruscan navy.
People fought over Campania because it had a wealth of resources. It had a favourable climate, fertile soil, and above all, it was very well placed in the Mediterranean because it provided a stopover for boats coming from the east and wanting to go on towards northern Europe. So it was an extremely important anchor point for these sailors. This means of transport brought in people, brought wealth, allowed exchange, and made the economy grow.
After the defeat at Cumae, the Etruscans in Capua and Pompeii were helpless. The fleet had been destroyed and they were cut off from northern Etruria. They'd lost control of the commercial traffic.
After the naval battle of 474, the Etruscans lost power in the region, and this can be seen in Pompeii.
For 50 years, populations of Greek origin regained control of Pompeii. But at the same time, its surface area seemed to shrink considerably. A second protective wall was built surrounding the center of the city. Everything points towards a decline in the urban core, the origin of which remains highly mysterious. Freed from Etruscan domination, the city fell under the control of another race from the mountains in the center of the peninsula, the Samnites. The historian Livy presents the Samnites as backward mountain folk and contrasts them with the civilized townspeople of the plain. But is this fair? Who were they? Their language, related to Oscan, can give us some clues to understanding them. Paolo Pacetti is one of the few linguists specializing in Oscan, a language that has long remained a mystery.
This encounter between the Samnites and pre-existing civilizations, particularly the Greeks, had a major impact in Campania, which was the birth of the Oscan language, which emerged at that time. But the Samnites spread even further south.
In the second half of the 5th century BC, the Samnites wanted to found states on the plain at the foot of Vesuvius. They coveted the fertile lands of southern and eastern Campania. At the end of the 5th century, their warriors set out to conquer the Sarno Valley and attacked the cities of Capua, Cumae, and Pompeii.
From the time of the arrival of the Samnite population in Pompeii, we see a monumental development of the city. There's urban planning, with a division and organisation of urban blocks, an organisation of public and private spaces, spaces intended for worship, and spaces intended for production.
They start to create the city that will be the Roman city. It's during the Samnite period that the Forum is reconfigured. It's during the Samnite period that they start to build the first baths. It's during the Samnite period that they start to draw up the plans for the theatres.
Under Samnite rule, the architectural aspect of the city evolved. Archaeologist Sandra Zanella is a specialist in the urban evolution of Pompeii. She's trying to understand the changes that took place after the fall of the city.
From an archaeological point of view, the arrival of the Samnites, like the success of other settlements, led to changes in construction techniques and the architecture in general. In the Pompeii of the 6th century BC, the walls were built out of different types of materials, particularly lava. With the arrival of the Samnites, we see the use of other building materials, in particular Sano limestone, with which the walls of the city are made, but which is also used to make private buildings inside the insula.
The Samnites, being the new masters of the city, their language, Oscan, became the official language.
The Oscan language emerged in Campania between the 5th and 4th centuries BC. It's the language that unified Campania. In ancient Campania, writing was used extensively. In Pompeii, a large number of inscriptions have been found, written in Etruscan. After that came the Oscan language, which became the official language. The language that can be described, in quotation marks, as the national language. Oscan became the official language of the city until Romanization. It was therefore the language of the state, the language of administration, the language of public relations.
After the Samnite conquest, the ramparts were reinforced and the Doric temple was restored. Buildings even spread beyond the limits of the historic center of Pompeii. The territory that the city dominated adjoined the rival state of Campania, also founded by the Samnites in the middle of the 5th century BC, around the cities of Capua and Cumae. But further north still, like the Greeks and Etruscans before it, a rapidly expanding Latin population was being drawn to the rich Campania, the Romans. Having become a republic with strong institutions, Rome began to emerge as the dominant city of central Italy, Lazio. From the 4th to the beginning of the 3rd century BC, the Roman state set out to conquer the Italian peninsula. The legions conquered a part of Etruria and definitively defeated the other Latin peoples. In the center of the peninsula, the Romans and Samnites stared each other down. The challenge for Rome was to expand south along the coast. Two territories were missing from its string of conquests: the Samnian mountains and the Campanian state, and therefore the region of Pompeii. They would have to defeat the fierce Samnites and seize the city.
Once this Samnite obstacle had been overcome, the Romans would be able to carry on towards the south and conquer the whole of the southern peninsula. But first they had to defeat the Samnites, who were the dominant race between the Roman conquests in the north and Greater Greece in the south.
War broke out in 327 BC and would last several decades, during which the city of Pompeii continued to grow. The Samnites, influenced by Greek architecture and that of the Romans, their neighbours and rivals, would give the city its almost definitive appearance.
Pompeii had started to Romanize itself, to model itself on Rome, the city that has fascinated the whole of the Mediterranean world. Pompeii had already begun to restructure its forum and to build the temple of Jupiter.
Pompeii expanded considerably towards the east, following an orthogonal plan, and the Cardo Maximus also moved in this direction. Finally, numerous monuments were built: the Basilica, the Temple of Jupiter, the Triangular and the Civic Forums, the Theatre and Temple of Isis, the Baths and the Samnite Palestra. During the 2nd century BC, the local dignitaries decided to redesign the city according to purely Hellenistic monumental models. The facades of the street leading to the Forum were redone with blocks of grey tuff from Nocera and large limestone blocks from Sarno. Pilasters, columns and cornices appeared on the monuments. During the same period, the outer wall was reinforced. It was at this time that its 8 gates were redesigned. 7 remain today: the Marina Gate, the Herculaneum Gate, which leads towards this wealthy little seaside town, the Vesuvius Gate, the highest point in the city, the gate leading to Nocera, Nola and Sarno, as well as the gate towards Stabia. An inscription in Oscan, dating from the 2nd century BC, found in the inner arch of the Nola Gate, states that the construction of the building was ordered by Vibius Papidius, son of Vibius, chief magistrate of the city. The reinforcement of the wall went hand in hand with the establishment of a grid-patterned street plan. The city now extended beyond its own walls, into its immediate surroundings, with the construction of peri-urban villas, upon which the Romans would later build other structures. The Samnite Pompeii was a well-designed and well-organized urban megastructure already. Inspired by the greatest Greek achievements, the Great Theatre of Pompeii was built in the 2nd century BC in a hollow in the basalt plateau, probably an old stone quarry. While at that time, the Romans were only building ephemeral wooden stages, the theatre in Pompeii has 5,000 tiered seats. A velum, or velarium, composed of a series of linen sails stretched over the stands, provided shade for the spectators on hot summer days. The Hellenic inspiration is obvious in the 3-part structure of the building: the horseshoe-shaped cavea, the seating area for the audience; the orchestra at the foot of the cavea, in which the chorus performed; and finally, the scaenae. We can also see the 3 classic divisions of the cavea: the Ema cavea, reserved for senators and high society; the Media cavea, for respectable citizens; and the Summa cavea, for the most humble members of the public. The quadriportico next to the theatre is the oldest attached to a theatre in Italy. Composed of 74 Doric columns, the audience could take a stroll there between performances. Another monument testifies to the Greek influence: the Palestra, where young people came to exercise, as they did in Sparta and Athens. If, during the 3rd and 2nd centuries, the councillors of Pompeii could devote so many financial resources to new infrastructures and buildings, it's because the city was surrounded by a Garden of Eden. The city's inhabitants were totally unaware of the volcano's dangers, despite several earthquakes.
These volcanic phenomena were perceived as the reactions of monstrous creatures who had tried to rebel against the gods of Olympus and been defeated.
Enriched by viticulture, livestock and agriculture, the city had another asset: its active sea and river port, which made it a thriving commercial hub.
There's peace, which brings prosperity, and so Pompeii was able to benefit from the fertility of the land around it and benefit from the trade routes and its port.
But this superb city had dreams of independence from the Samnite aristocrats. Peace would not last, and rivalry between Romans and Samnites increased. The last chapter of the history of Pompeii would be written in blood.
It has to be said that the Roman conquest of Pompeii took place in a violent, dramatic and traumatic fashion.
At the turn of the 3rd century BC, after being defeated several times, the Romans finally got their revenge on the Samnites. They defeated them at Bovianum, in the heart of their mountain stronghold. But this defeat didn't signal the end of the Samnites' hopes. In 295 BC, the Samnites managed to push north to present-day Sassoferrato, 200 kilometers northeast of Rome. There they joined their allies. This is where the decisive battle would take place, the Battle of Sentinum. Starting badly for the Romans, it nonetheless turned to their advantage. 25,000 Samnite warriors lost their lives, as opposed to 9,000 Romans. 5 years later, the Samnites were forced to sign a peace treaty containing some harsh conditions. They had to provide soldiers for the Roman Republic. The Pompeians entered reluctantly into the Roman military alliance.
The agreement of 290 brought peace with the Samnites, and the Romans could continue south. Now Pompeii, which would still be inhabited by Samnites, would be peaceful.
The Roman influence can be seen in Pompeii's monuments, such as the Stabian Baths, the oldest in the city, dating from the 3rd century BC. They are laid out around a central palestra, a typically Greek element. The first baths were cold, supplied with water from a simple well. The space was dimly lit and gloomy, because the number and the size of the windows was reduced to a minimum to avoid heat loss.
What's interesting about the Stabian Baths is that we see in them the birth of what will become Roman baths.
The first warm and hot baths appeared during the second half of the 2nd century, with the spread of the hypercourse system. The floor was composed of slabs that sat on brick pillars 60 to 70 centimeters high. A hearth outside the buildings heated the basement, the ground and the pools. The smoke was evacuated through a terracotta pipe placed against the wall opposite the hearth. Pompeii continued to make itself more beautiful. The forum was adorned with a basilica. But in 91 BC, a new generation of Pompeians demanded more autonomy from the powerful Roman Republic and finally rejected the old military alliance. The Roman Senate responded immediately by sending one of its generals to the scene, Sulla. It would be war.
This war went through several episodes, each of which lasted about 3 years, and one of the last episodes took place right here in Pompeii. It ended in a siege which was both brutal and bloody, during which the Pompeians barricaded themselves inside the city to withstand the Roman onslaught.
General Sulla besieged Pompeii.
Sulla arrived and positioned himself in the northern part of Pompeii, where he had the most commanding position for his artillery, and he bombarded the city. What's striking, even today, is that in the wall between the Vesuvius Gate and the Herculaneum Gate, we can see the holes made by the cannonballs fired by Sulla's army at the walls of Pompeii.
The city organized itself. Reinforcements came from all over the Sarno Valley to help the Pompeians. The city shows signs of the arrival and installation of these fresh troops. A dozen inscriptions in the Oscan language. Etuns.
The word Etuns may mean soldiers or troops, we don't know exactly. But they were there to give directions to soldiers or citizens who had joined the resistance.
In other words, the Etuns are signposts used by Samnite reinforcements from all over Campania to find their way around the city. But despite the influx of warriors, the Roman victory was total. The Samnites lost their independence for good. Pompeii became a settlement colony. The objective now for the Romans was to erase all memory of the losers. Pompeii would become definitively Roman. The Samnites faded into almost total oblivion.
There's a massive influx of veterans from the Roman army, maybe 4,000 or 5,000, who come and settle in Pompeii. There's a massive demographic, social and economic change. From this moment, Pompeii became truly Roman.
From the 1st century BC, new monumental constructions appeared. The small theatre, the thermal baths and the amphitheatre.
There were separate thermal baths for men and for women. They still shared the heating system, but they made a special section for women on the other side of the men's area. The entrances are almost opposite one another. The women also had changing rooms, cold rooms, warm rooms, hot rooms, but they didn't have the palestra, which was for men only.
During the 1st century AD, the prosperity of the city allowed its dignitaries to modernize the water supply network. A castellum aquae, a water tower built near the Vesuvius gate, the highest point in the agglomeration, distributed the precious liquid to secondary water towers, which released a constant flow to public buildings, fountains, and private homes. This water tower was fed by an even more impressive structure, an aqueduct, 95 kilometers long, built between 27 and 10 BC on the orders of Emperor Augustus. It supplied water to 8 cities in the Bay of Naples, including Pompeii, Stabia and Nola, and ended its mad dash through Campania in the Piscina Mirabilis in the port of Misenum. The Roman engineers had thought of everything.
Pompeii is a city that slopes gently towards the sea from north to south. Imagine if the water had been left to flow naturally, the pressure for the buildings down at the bottom would have been colossal. So, at regular intervals, the pipe comes up in a water tower, and the water flows into an open container at the top. This causes the pressure to drop. The water then comes back down through another pipe which takes it on down the slope. It's the succession of different water towers that reduces the pressure, which would have been too great if the pipes had run straight down from the north to the public buildings and the houses in the south.
Another typically Roman monument appeared in the Pompeian landscape. The amphitheatre.
While the theatre is a Greek creation which had been around for a long time and which the Romans adapted, the amphitheatre is really a Roman creation. And what's extraordinary is that the amphitheatre in Pompeii is the oldest one known to us.
An imposing elliptical building, the amphitheatre is no less than 140 metres long and 105 wide, with a central arena of nearly 67 metres by more than 35 metres. The building rests on a platform and part of the city walls. The arena and the stands are dug several meters into the ground, making the whole thing a technological marvel. This amphitheatre, the oldest yet discovered from the Roman Empire, could accommodate 12,000 people, and some sources even suggest the staggering figure of 20,000 spectators.
It would be phenomenal. Pompeii had a 20,000-seat amphitheatre. It's hard to estimate the population of Pompeii, but it was between 10 and 15,000 people. The theatre has 3,000 seats, the Odeon next door has around 1,000. The amphitheatre has 20,000 seats. It's an extraordinary venue. It's easy to imagine that people from the surrounding area would come to Pompeii to see shows.
Gladiator shows played an important role in the life of the city. Pompeii even had its own gladiator school. A painting discovered by archaeologists gives us a very eloquent page of history on this subject. Like a snapshot, it takes us back to 59 AD. In that year, Pompeii held a big gladiatorial competition between the neighbouring cities. The fresco tells us that Nocera was declared the winner, which didn't go down at all well with the audience in Pompeii, and a fight broke out between the rival towns. The ensuing riot caused such a stir that the Roman Senate decided, after investigation, to ban such shows in Pompeii for the next 10 years. During the 1st century BC, Pompeii became the perfect Roman city, with all the architectural markers of its conqueror's civilization. The Campanian city, after nearly 500 years of history, had become a mini paradise. Gone were the days of the hut villages of the Saracens people. The magnificence of its temples, its forum, and its performance venues expressed its grandeur and its wealth. The city flourished in the heart of a region blessed by the gods, bathed in the turquoise waters of the Tyrrhenian Sea. Now Roman, Pompeii remained a cosmopolitan city, inhabited by men and women, originating from every corner of the Italian peninsula, Africa, and Northern Europe. But after 4,000 years of restless sleep, in AD 79, Vesuvius finally awoke. The force of its explosion was equivalent to 1,000 Hiroshima bombs. A cloud of gas and dust rose above the crater to an altitude of 30,000 meters. For 18 hours, the projections fell on the city. Vesuvius, which had already buried the prehistoric villages of Nola and Longola, covered Pompeii with 5 meters of ash. More than 2,000 people lost their lives. The eruption lasted for 2 days. Then the crater went back to sleep. Having given the Greeks, Etruscans, Samnites and Romans fertility, prosperity and a magnificent city, Vesuvius buried everything. After 8 centuries of history, Pompeii disappeared.